Stay tuned for Butler on Business, coming up next on the Liberty Express.
Welcome back to Butler on Business. On the phone with us now is Bob. Now, you are a native, aren't you? I know your mom and dad met down here, and your dad was used to write for the Yellow Jacket. And were you born down here?
Well, no, and we've got one skipped a generation. It'd be Grandma and Granddad.
Okay.
Met down there, so I'm not a native.
Well, we're going to count. We're going to count you as one.
Count me as one.
Yeah, we are. Bob is the managing director of Absolute Investment Management. He is the author of America's Bubble Economy and Aftershock. I have Aftershock sitting here on my iPad. And I would like to tell people, Bob wrote this long before the housing bubble popped. He told us the housing bubble was going to pop, and he told us how the government was going to respond to the popping of the housing bubble. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, is the 6 psychological stages of denying the bubbles are bursting. And I would say, based on what you outlined in your book, what we're seeing now is the dollar and government debt bubble. That phase. Mm-hmm. All right. It's obviously not yet begun to pop, but my guess would be soon. Soon we should see these two bubbles start to pop.
Yeah, well, what we're seeing now is the pump up, and just like we saw when I wrote America's Bubble Economy back in 2004, we were in the pump up stage, and so life is looking good. I might have said that housing prices were overvalued, but everybody goes, Widemer, who cares? I just made 20% on my home. Life is good, and who's to say it's not going to go on for a little longer? And it did for a little longer, and that's kind of what the stage we're in right now. We're still able to borrow. Remember how much we're borrowing? It's about 10% of our GDP. That's a massive increase. Same on printed money. So we're in the pump-up phase, and we can still pump up more. I guess that's the bottom line. And we will have positive short-term effects. But we're getting within that kind of 2 to 3 year limit where I say things are going to start to pop.
Now, I remember you talking about a speech that you were giving, asking them where this money's coming from, money from heaven.
Absolutely. It's been solved. We printed money, and they took on more debt. It's all solved. Right.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, obviously not. This is just more pumping up the bubble. And you bring up a good point, is that it's not just the U.S. printing money. It's Europe. Japan's starting to print some more now. England's printing. And at the same time, we're even adding more debt with printed money. And, of course, it works for a little while. That, as you say, quote, solves it.
Well, all right, so we're in the pump-up stage, and I guess, like with any pump-up stage, there's going to be kind of a blow-off top at some point and I would argue, given that every central bank around the world is flooding the world with the equivalent of, not the equivalent of paper money. I mean, we're just being inundated with paper money, staggering amounts of this paper. We're kind of in the blow-off stage, aren't we?
We are. We're kind of, we're in that point where it's gotten the pressure's on. Just like I said, when all those bubbles pop, that's going to put the pressure to do just that, print money and borrow a lot of money around the world. And so we're in that stage where, we're just, we're able to open the floodgates, get those positive, effects short term. But you've only got, at this point, once you start printing money, you kind of lit the fuse, because debt you can maybe work around for a while. But once you print money, you've lit the fuse on inflation. Maybe it can be slowed down a lot, and it can be, but it can't be slowed down forever. So I think you're still in that 2-3 year window before things really start to pop. And believe me, we haven't seen the end in any way of printed money and borrowed money. And that's part of what I'm assuming, is that we're going to have to borrow and print a whole lot more in the next few years as well.
Bob, this is Jason Riddle. Thanks for joining the program. A lot of the economists that I've spoken with have alluded to the fact that it's during this bubble stage, it's during the stage where we're creating these artificial bubbles, where the governments, the central banks, are inflating the money supply, creating these bubbles. It's during that stage that we're experiencing this illusion of prosperity, but we're actually creating a lot of damage to the underlying economic structure of our country. Do you buy into that theory, that it's really during this bubble stage where the bulk of the damage is actually done? It's not the bursting of the bubble, but the bubble itself?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's setting the stage for it. Just like when you're pumping up the price of housing, right? You were setting the stage for a lot of people to lose a lot of money because as the price of homes went up, people were buying them at those higher prices. When it falls, that's going to be a big problem. So you're setting the stage during that time, during that housing run up, for all the pain to come, all the losses that the banks took, all the losses that AIG took, all the losses that the government took. So this is exactly when the real problem is being created. Absolutely. That's exactly the same analogy as with housing as with pumping up our money supply or our debt.
I know you're thinking 2 to 3 years out. It's sooner rather than later the party's going to end.
I think sooner rather than later, and even if the big problem doesn't hit, might even be 4 years. These things can be extended out. I always say never underestimate the power of the government to print or borrow money. You can also have problems earlier. People do see these things in advance. It's not like it's completely unclear to everybody, and it causes problems, and it doesn't solve all problems. Despite all of this pumping, the economy still has issues, and that's going to be an issue for us going forward. And perhaps more importantly, we're going to see the issues in Europe, and I think China, which has done an awful lot of money printing itself, is going to cause a lot of problems and that will ultimately impact us. So there are issues that can happen before these things burst, even in 2, 3, or 4 years, because we're not all that. We're fragile. We're in a fragile state now, and external events from Europe and China can still hurt us, and pretty high unemployment still.
Bob, I know that all this money printing is manifesting itself now in energy prices and food prices, but the public at large seems to be oblivious to this underlying problem, this groundswell of inflation that we've got building underneath us.
Well, there's some concerns, but, wasn't it the same way with the housing bubble when I was writing America's Bubble Economy? People were fairly oblivious. What did I say, coming on the show? I said, people said, I said that housing was overvalued, and people would go, gee, Widemer, I'm up 20%, I'm doing fine. And right now, you're not seeing the inflation that strongly. The Milton Friedman, the great monetarist, Nobel Prize-winning economist, said that inflation's a lot like the fool in the shower. And what he meant is, when you turn the hot water on, you get cold water, and so you turn on more, and you keep turning it on, and all the way up, and still cold, and then all of a sudden, boom, the hot water hits, and you get scalded. And that's a little like how it is now. Right now, it doesn't feel so bad, and then it does. So that's part of the reason we're a little bit complacent now is we're getting the good effects, and the bad effects are yet to come, kind of like the housing bubble in 2004.
What are the 6 steps, 6 distinct psychological stages of denial of a bursting bubble?
Well, I don't have that exactly by memory, but essentially what we're going to do is, as you said, deny. Then we're going to, maybe say that the world's coming to an end, sort of the Armageddon stage, and then we're going to actually sit back and take, rational actions. I mean, before that, we'll take some irrational actions. We'll take rational actions to try to solve this problem. People think that I'm a bit of gloom and doom. I'm not. I'm very optimistic. I think we will solve these problems. I think we're going to work hard to solve them. I just think we're going to go through more pain than I would want, partly because we're denying, and then we're going to be a bit irrational in responding to it, in the first place. But in the end, I guess the end of the chain is that we are going to, maybe be forced to solve the problems, but we will solve the problems in the end, and I think we'll have a much better economy and better society after it's all done. Might be painful, will be painful going through it, but I think the outcome is going to be quite positive. I think we're going to learn a lot. The hard way, is we sometimes have with our kids, but we're going to learn a lot, and we'll get through it. We'll be much better for it.
Bob, is there anything that the average person can do to shield themselves from some of that pain as this scenario unfolds?
Absolutely. As I always say, a few basics. Be careful about how much exposure you have in long-term bonds, stock market. I know they've done well, recently, and again, they will while we're pumping up these bubbles. But don't think it's forever. Be willing to move out. Maybe minimize your exposure because it's hard to time directly. Do you have a fixed rate mortgage? If you have a home, have a fixed rate mortgage. Minimize your credit card debt. Kind of standard personal finance recommendations there. Keep your debt lower. And then I would put some gold in your portfolio. Whatever you feel comfortable with. But I think long term, certainly for the next 4 or 5 years, it will do well. I think it's going to continue for a while because I think the drivers behind gold will continue to be there, even if it seems high priced. I understand that. I think the drivers are still there, and anybody can have gold, and I think help protect themselves as well.
Bob, since I hit you cold, I pulled up your notes. Denial, market cycles, fantasize Great Depression, back to basics, imagine Armageddon, revolutionary action.
Thank you.
All right. So well said, huh?
Very good.
Okay, Mark.
You're signed on. You're a co-writer.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Now, market. Can we talk about the market cycle? Is that what we're seeing right now? We're kind of back up to this top side of the trading range.
Exactly.
Although it is with these inflated dollars.
Yeah, and that's what people are hoping is that, and that's not just people, that's kind of what the Federal Reserve is essentially hoping, is they're hoping we're in a down cycle that will simply cycle up, will cycle out, and they'll be able to pull all that money back out before it creates inflation. And they're aware that this money printing does create inflation. They just kind of, feel like they've gotten away with it for a while, and they kind of have. Maybe the figures aren't too good, or we're not, measuring inflation properly, but they're hoping in the end they'll be able to pull it out with a market cycle, and that's what most people are thinking. We're just in a market cycle. It's, whatever it is, it'll be fine. And I'm saying things have fundamentally changed. You got a bubble pop, not a market cycle, and that's what you got to watch out for. So that's very much what people are kind of thinking, and I say that's kind of the big trap. And in a broader sense, they're kind of hoping the 80s and 90s come back. If you know the cartoon at the end of my book that shows two guys at a bar, one sort of bemoaning, he said, I want my bubble back. And that's kind of what we're all hoping. And that's part of that cycle. In some ways, we'll cycle back to the great times of the 80s and 90s when the stock market went up 1,000%. But that was a highly unusual period. I think we got a bubble pop on our hands, and I think that's the one to prepare for.
Bob, anybody can write about what happened in the past. It takes an altogether different fellow to write about what's going to happen in the future. And for those of you who have not read America's Bubble Economy, this was written before the bubble burst, and it is a very interesting read on how clearly you saw this problem. So
thank you.
My hat goes off to you, and it's always an honor to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate it.